All right, so welcome. We're going to be diving into a case from Bermuda using excerpts from the actual court judgment. So this has been the deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.
The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information discussed may not reflect the most current legal developments and is subject to change. For advice on specific legal issues, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. The opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organizations they are affiliated with. By watching this video, you acknowledge and agree to this disclaimer.
All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that affects you every single day, but you might not even realize it.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
It's the Personal Information Protection Act of 2016.
Ah, okay.
Think about it. Online shopping, doctor's appointments, even just scrolling through social media.
Right.
This act is the invisible hand shaping how your data gets handled.
It's true. This act isn't just for, like, tech giants or legal eagles, you know?
Right.
It's the bedrock of data privacy in our increasingly digital world.
Yeah.
It sets the rules of the game for every organization handling your personal information.
Okay, so we're talking about every organization.
Yeah.
That's a pretty wide net, right? I mean,
yeah.
Does this mean every mom-and-pop shop needs a legal team dedicated to data privacy?
Well, not exactly a legal team for every shop, but the act does make it clear.
Okay.
Every organization, no matter the size, has to have its act together when it comes to data protection. One of the ways it does that is by mandating a designated privacy officer.
Interesting. So there's a specific person in each company responsible for keeping things on the straight and narrow, data-wise.
Yeah,
I guess that means there's someone I can actually contact if I have concerns.
exactly. And this isn't about aiming for some unattainable standard of perfect data protection.
Right.
The act focuses on reasonable steps,
Okay.
meaning organizations need to take appropriate measures based on the type of information they're handling.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
A one-size-fits-all approach wouldn't really work here.
right.
Now, I'm curious about how the Act actually defines the conditions for using personal information.
Okay.
Can organizations just use our data for any reason they want?
Not at all.
Okay.
The Act lays out very specific conditions under which an organization can use your personal information.
Okay.
One of the most important is explicit consent.
Okay.
This means you, as the individual, knowingly and clearly agree to your data being used for a very specific purpose.
So, for example, if I'm signing up for an online service and they want to use my data to improve their product, they have to specifically ask for my permission for that.
Exactly. It's not just about burying it in a lengthy terms and conditions document that nobody actually reads.
Right.
It has to be clear and upfront.
Okay, so explicit consent is key.
Yes.
What other conditions would allow an organization to use my personal information?
Another condition is legitimate interest.
Okay.
Now, this one can be a bit trickier as it involves a balancing act. The organization has to have a valid reason for using your data that doesn't override your privacy rights.
I can see where that could get murky.
Yeah.
So how do we determine whether something is a legitimate interest or just an excuse to exploit data?
It's all about proportionality and context.
Okay.
Let's say a company needs your address to deliver a package you ordered.
Right.
That's a pretty clear-cut example of legitimate interest.
Yeah.
But if they're using your browsing history to target you with ads without your consent, that's crossing the line.
So it's not just about the company's interests,
Right.
but also about respecting the individual's rights and expectations.
Exactly.
Are there any other situations where an organization could use my data?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes organizations might be legally obligated to collect or use your data.
Right.
Like when filing taxes or complying with other regulations.
Got it.
In these cases, it's not about the company's choice, but about fulfilling legal requirements.
Right. Those situations make sense.
Yeah.
It's not always about the company wanting to use my data.
Right.
Sometimes they're required to.
Exactly.
What about situations where using my data could benefit the public good?
You're thinking about the public interest condition.
Okay.
This means using your data is deemed necessary for public safety or benefit.
Right.
Think of situations like a health crisis or crime prevention where accessing certain data could be crucial.
Okay, so there are situations where the individual's privacy might be slightly limited if it serves a greater purpose.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the Act tries to strike a balance, making sure it's not a free-for-all when it comes to using our personal information.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And a big part of maintaining that balance is through transparency and individual rights, which the Act emphasizes heavily.
So it's not just about organizations' responsibilities,
Right.
but also about empowering individuals to have more control over their data.
You hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
The Act makes it clear. You have the right to know what personal information an organization holds about you
Mm-hmm.
and to request corrections if anything is inaccurate.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's about taking ownership of your own data footprint.
Exactly.
So does that mean I need to send out formal requests every time I want to know what data a company has on me?
Not necessarily. The
Yeah.
Act requires organizations to provide what's called a privacy notice.
All right.
Think of it like a nutritional label for your data.
Got it.
It tells you what information is collected, how it's used, who it might be shared with,
Mm-hmm.
and crucially, how you can exercise your rights.
So before I hand over my data, I can see exactly what's in store for it.
Yeah.
That's definitely a step towards transparency.
It is. It allows you to make informed decisions about your data
Hmm.
and understand the implications of sharing it.
Okay.
But like most things in life, there are exceptions to this access.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of information would be off limits?
Think about legally privileged information
Okay.
or data that could compromise someone's safety if released.
Right.
Imagine confidential legal documents or information related to an ongoing investigation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want someone exploiting this right to access information that could harm others
Yeah.
or interfere with legal proceedings.
Exactly. It's about balancing the individual's right to know with the need to protect sensitive information
Yeah.
and maintain the integrity of legal processes.
So while the right to access exists, it's not absolute
Right.
and is weighed against other considerations.
Right.
Now, is all personal information treated the same way?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and it brings us to the concept of sensitive personal information.
Okay.
The Act recognizes that certain types of information are inherently more sensitive and require a higher level of protection.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah.
What kind of information falls under this sensitive umbrella?
Think about information relating to your health, sexual orientation, religious beliefs,
Okay.
or even your genetic information.
Right.
This is the kind of data that, if misused, could lead to serious harm, discrimination, or even put your safety at risk.
Okay, that definitely makes sense.
Right.
So the rules are stricter when organizations want to use this type of information.
Absolutely. For sensitive personal information,
Okay.
organizations need to obtain explicit consent for the specific purpose they want to use it for,
Right.
or have very specific and compelling legal justification for using it without explicit consent. The bar is set much higher.
So if my doctor needs access to my medical records for treatment purposes, that's one thing.
Right.
But a company using my genetic information for targeted advertising without my knowledge,
Yeah.
that's a hard no.
You nailed it. The Act draws a clear line in the sand when it comes to protecting sensitive personal information.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
All this talk about protecting sensitive information makes me wonder about data security in general.
Okay.
What does the Act say about keeping our information safe from things like hacking and data breaches?
That's a crucial point, and the Act doesn't shy away from it.
Mm-hmm.
It obligates organizations to implement appropriate safeguards to protect personal information from unauthorized access, use, or disclosure.
So they can't just collect the data and leave it sitting around unprotected.
No.
What kind of safeguards are we talking about here?
It's a multi-layered approach.
Okay.
Think technical measures like encryption and firewalls, physical security measures like controlled access to data centers, and even administrative procedures like employee training and regular security audits.
Okay.
They have to cover all the bases.
So it's not just about technology, it's also about creating a culture of security within the organization.
Exactly.
But even with all these safeguards in place,
Yeah,
things can still go wrong.
right.
What happens if there is a data breach, despite all the precautions?
That's a scenario the Act anticipates.
Okay.
There's a mandatory breach notification requirement.
Okay.
If personal data is compromised, the organization is legally obligated to report it, both to the individuals affected and to the relevant authorities.
So it's like an alarm bell going off,
Exactly.
alerting everyone that something's happened and that action needs to be taken.
It forces transparency and accountability,
Right.
preventing organizations from sweeping data breaches under the rug.
Got it.
It also empowers individuals to take steps to protect themselves.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Hmm.
Preventing breaches, responding swiftly and transparently if they happen,
Yes.
and ensuring everyone is informed.
Exactly.
Does the Act specify what kind of security measures are considered appropriate? Or does it depend on the context?
It's about proportionality again.
Okay.
The Act emphasizes that organizations need to assess the risks involved and take security measures that are proportionate to the sensitivity of the data they're handling.
So the higher the stakes, the stronger the security measures need to be.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
makes sense.
We've covered a lot of ground so far,
Yeah, we have.
but it's all starting to paint a really clear picture.
Yeah.
The Act sets the rules,
Mhm.
organizations have to comply, and individuals have rights and protections.
Precisely.
And that protection extends even when data crosses borders, which is becoming increasingly relevant in our interconnected world.
It is.
Hold on, really? So if my data is transferred to another country,
Yeah.
maybe one with weaker privacy laws, does the Act still protect me?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
And it's something the Act directly addresses.
Right.
Even when personal information is transferred to another
Right.
entity, whether it's for processing, storage, or any other purpose,
Okay.
the organization transferring the data has a responsibility to ensure comparable levels of protection,
Okay.
regardless of where that data ends up geographically.
So my privacy rights don't magically disappear just because my data is traveling the world.
Exactly.
Oh, good.
Your rights are meant to travel with your data.
That's a relief.
Right.
But practically speaking, how can they guarantee that level of protection in another country where the laws might not be as stringent?
The Act provides several mechanisms for achieving this.
Okay.
Think of contractual agreements with the receiving organization
All right.
that mandate specific data protection standards
Right.
or adherence to corporate codes of conduct that prioritize privacy and data security,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of location.
Sure.
And there are also internationally recognized certifications or frameworks that organizations can rely on to ensure consistency in data protection.
Okay, so even though the data is crossing borders, there are ways to bridge the gap and maintain a consistent level of protection.
That's the goal.
Now, there's another group that requires special consideration when it comes to data protection,
Right.
a group that might not fully grasp the implications of sharing their information online.
Yes,
You're talking about children, right?
I am.
They're incredibly vulnerable in the digital age.
Very much so.
What does the app say about protecting their data?
You're right. Children need extra layers of protection.
Mm-hmm.
And the Act acknowledges that it has specific provisions for handling children's data,
So,
recognizing their potential lack of understanding about online privacy
Yeah.
and the long-term consequences of sharing information.
so extra precautions are needed to safeguard them.
Yes.
What do those look like in practice?
One of the key requirements is obtaining parental or guardian consent
Okay.
before collecting or using a child's personal information, especially for online services that are targeted at children.
Okay.
It's about putting the decision-making power in the hands of the adults who are responsible for protecting the child's best interests.
So let's say my child wants to download a gaming app that collects personal information.
Yeah,
The app would need to get my permission before collecting any data from my child.
that's right. Okay.
It can't just rely on the child clicking agree to the terms and conditions without fully understanding what that means.
Right.
The Act ensures that there's a layer of parental oversight to protect children's data.
That's a crucial safeguard,
It is.
especially in a world where children are increasingly exposed to online platforms and services.
Yes.
It seems like the Act really tries to cover all the bases when it comes to personal information,
Yeah.
from broad principles to specific situations like sensitive data and children's information. It creates a pretty comprehensive framework.
It does, and importantly, it consistently reinforces the right of individuals to access their own personal information held by organizations.
Right. We touched upon this earlier,
Yeah.
but it's worth emphasizing again.
Yes.
So I have the right to request a company to tell me what information they have on me.
Absolutely.
The Act champions transparency and control for individuals when it comes to their data.
Okay.
You have the right to know what's out there, what's being used, and how it's being handled.
But we also discussed that there are certain limitations to this. Right.
That's correct.
Not all information is accessible on demand.
That is true.
Okay.
There are reasonable limitations in place to protect sensitive information,
Mm-hmm.
prevent harm, and ensure the integrity of legal processes.
Okay.
For example, information related to ongoing legal proceedings or data that could compromise someone else's privacy would likely be exempt from this access.
So once again, it's about striking that balance. Individual rights versus legitimate reasons to withhold certain information.
You got it.
It seems like this theme of balance runs throughout the entire Act,
Yeah.
protecting individual privacy while still allowing for the responsible and ethical use of data.
You've captured the essence of it perfectly. It's not about locking down data completely, but rather finding a way to navigate the digital world in a way that respects both innovation and individual rights.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful so far.
Good.
I'm already starting to see the Act in action, even in my own daily online activity.
It's amazing how pervasive it is, right?
Yeah.
It's in every corner of our digital lives.
Now, I'm really curious to delve into some of the more nuanced aspects of the Act,
Okay.
particularly the areas that might not be as obvious at first glance.
Sounds good. It's fascinating how the Act delves into those less obvious but equally important details, right? It's not just about big picture principles. It's also about the nitty-gritty of data handling.
Right.
One concept that often gets overlooked but is crucial is purpose limitation.
Okay, but purpose limitation.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing, but a bit technical.
It can be.
What's that all about?
Think of it this way. When you provide your personal information, you usually have a specific purpose in mind, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you give your email address to sign up for a newsletter from a particular store.
Right.
Purpose limitation means that the store can use your email to send you the newsletter, but they can't turn around and start sending you unrelated marketing materials without your explicit permission.
So no more sneaky side hustles with my data.
Exactly.
I'm liking the sound of this.
It's about respecting the original agreement between you and the organization.
Okay.
Transparency and trust are paramount here.
Right.
You provided your data for a specific reason, and it shouldn't be used for something completely different without your knowing consent.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
It seems like this principle really puts the individual back in control.
it does.
What other nuanced aspects of the Act might we miss if we're not paying close attention?
Another one that's worth highlighting is the concept of proportionality,
Okay.
which we touched upon briefly when discussing security measures.
Right.
It applies more broadly, though. It basically means that the amount of personal information an organization collects and the way they use it
Okay.
should be in proportion to the purpose for which they're collecting it in the first place.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I'm just signing up for a basic online service, they shouldn't be asking for my entire life story already.
You're exactly right.
Okay.
Proportionality means minimizing data collection as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's about organizations taking a step back and asking themselves,
Right.
do we really need this information to provide this service? Is it truly necessary?
That's a question I wish more companies would ask themselves.
I know, right?
It seems like they often collect data just because they can, without really thinking about the individual's privacy or the potential risks involved.
You've hit on a common concern, and it's one the Act tries to address head-on.
Okay.
It promotes a mindset shift toward responsible data minimization,
Right.
where organizations are more thoughtful about what they collect and why.
So it's not just about securing the data we have.
Right.
It's also about being more selective about what we collect in the first place.
Exactly.
That seems like a proactive approach to data protection.
It is.
What other responsibilities does the Act place on organizations to ensure they're handling data properly?
Data quality is another one that often gets overlooked.
Data quality.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not enough to just collect and secure data.
Right.
Organizations also have a responsibility to ensure that the information they hold is accurate and up to date.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What good is secure data if it's full of errors or outdated information?
Exactly.
Right.
The Act emphasizes the need for mechanisms to update information.
Okay.
Like if someone changes their address or phone number. And if an organization discovers that some information is inaccurate, they have an obligation to correct it promptly.
So it's a dynamic process, not just a one-time data grab.
Right.
They have to be actively involved in maintaining the accuracy of the information they hold.
It's an ongoing responsibility that comes with handling personal data.
Okay.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often a source of concern for people. The transfer of personal information to third parties.
Oh, yes.
The world of data sharing.
It can feel like our data is constantly being passed around without our knowledge or consent.
It can.
What does the Act say about this practice? Are there any limits or safeguards in place?
You've hit on a valid concern.
Okay.
The Act recognizes that sometimes organizations need to transfer personal information to other entities,
Right.
whether for processing, storage, or other legitimate reasons. but it doesn't give them a free pass to do so without any accountability.
So it's not a data free-for-all.
No.
You can't just hand over my information to any random company without consequences.
Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
First and foremost, there has to be a valid reason for transferring the data in the first place.
Right.
It can't just be done on a whim or because it's convenient. And just as importantly, the organization transferring the data has to ensure that the receiving party will provide a comparable level of protection.
So they can't just offload my data to a company with lax security practices or one that's located in a country with less stringent privacy laws.
Nope. They can't just turn a blind eye to where that data goes and how it's handled.
Okay.
The Act requires them to take steps to ensure that your privacy rights are upheld, even when your data is being processed or stored by someone else.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
It's reassuring that there are mechanisms in place to hold organizations accountable for how they share data.
it is.
But practically speaking, how can they guarantee that level of protection when dealing with third parties?
The Act outlines several ways to achieve this.
Oh.
For example, they could establish a contract with the receiving party that mandates specific data protection standards and security measures.
Okay.
Or they could rely on a corporate code of conduct that prioritizes privacy and applies consistently across all entities within the organization, regardless of location.
So even though the data is leaving their direct control,
Right.
they still have a responsibility to ensure it's handled properly.
They do.
What about situations where data is being transferred internationally?
Yeah.
Is there any way to bridge the gap between different countries' privacy laws?
That's a great question, and it's something the Act addresses specifically.
Okay.
Organizations can rely on internationally recognized certifications or frameworks that provide a baseline level of data protection.
Got it.
These frameworks establish common standards that can help ensure consistency, even when data is crossing borders.
So there are ways to create a more level playing field,
There are.
even in a globalized world with varying privacy regulations.
Precisely.
Now, let's shift our focus from the responsibilities of organizations to the enforcement of the Act itself.
Okay.
How is it actually ensured that organizations are playing by the rules? Is it just a set of guidelines, or are there real consequences for those who don't comply?
You're guessing it's more than just a suggestion box, right?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's a little more than a suggestion box.
There have to be some teeth to this law.
Right.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
The Act wouldn't be very effective if it was just a list of recommendations.
Yeah.
It establishes a dedicated enforcement mechanism
Okay.
to ensure that organizations take data protection seriously.
Mm-hmm.
At the heart of this mechanism is the commissioner, who has the power to investigate complaints, issue warnings, and even impose fines for violations.
So there are real consequences for those who flout the rules.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
The commissioner has a range of tools at their disposal to enforce the Act and make sure it's not just words on paper.
Right.
They can initiate investigations, demand information from organizations, and issue orders to cease certain practices.
That gives the Act some real weight.
It does.
Knowing that there's a dedicated authority to oversee its implementation and hold organizations accountable makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about the commissioner acting on their own initiative. Individuals also have the right to seek redress if their rights have been violated.
They do.
So if I believe a company has mishandled my data or violated my privacy rights,
Yeah,
I can take action myself.
absolutely. You can file a complaint with the commissioner,
Okay.
providing details of the alleged violation.
Okay.
The commissioner will then investigate the matter and determine whether the organization has indeed breached the Act.
That's empowering.
It is.
Knowing that there are avenues for recourse if our rights are infringed is crucial.
It is.
It feels like the Act is really trying to create a system where both organizations and individuals have clear roles and responsibilities when it comes to data privacy.
It is.
Okay.
And ultimately, it's about creating a data ecosystem that is both innovative and respectful of individual rights.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Good.
I feel like I'm starting to develop a deeper understanding of the complexities of data privacy and the delicate balance the Act tries to achieve.
It's a fascinating area, isn't it?
It is. It really is. It's amazing how much ground we've covered.
I know, right?
And I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this incredibly important topic.
Yeah, it's a deep dive for a reason.
What strikes me is that the Act goes beyond simply setting rules for organizations.
It does.
It seems to genuinely empower individuals to take control of their own data.
You're right. It's not just about compliance. It's about creating a culture of data privacy where individuals are informed, aware of their rights,
Mm-hmm.
and actively engaged in protecting their personal information.
So it's a two-way street. Organizations have responsibilities, but individuals also have a role to play in shaping the data privacy landscape.
Exactly. It's a shared responsibility.
Okay.
The Act provides the framework, the tools, and the avenues for recourse,
Right.
but it's up to all of us to use them effectively.
Thinking back to everything we've discussed,
Yeah.
what stands out to you as one of the most important takeaways for our listeners?
For me, it's the realization that data privacy isn't just about big tech companies or government agencies.
Right.
It applies to every single organization that handles personal information,
Yeah,
regardless of size or industry.
that's a crucial point.
It is.
It's easy to think that data privacy is only a concern for those dealing with massive data sets.
Right.
But the reality is that even small businesses, local shops, and community organizations have a responsibility to protect the personal information they collect.
The Act sets a universal standard.
Right.
Everyone needs to be aware of it and take the necessary steps to comply, no matter how big or small their operation might be.
And another thing that really struck me is the Act's emphasis on individual empowerment.
Yeah, it really does.
It gives people real, tangible tools to control their data and hold organizations accountable.
It does.
Right.
From the right to access and correct information to the right to file complaints, individuals are not just passive bystanders in the data-driven world.
Mhm.
They have agency.
It's a reminder that we have choices and that we don't have to blindly accept whatever data practices are thrown our way.
Right, you always have options.
We can ask questions, demand transparency, and exercise our rights.
Exactly. The more informed we are,
Mhm.
the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves and navigate the digital landscape safely.
This deep dive has definitely inspired me to take a more proactive approach to my own data privacy.
Good.
I'm already thinking about reviewing the privacy policies of the websites and apps I use regularly.
Yeah, good idea.
And I'm going to be much more mindful about what information I share and with whom.
That's fantastic to hear. It's those small, everyday actions that collectively create a more privacy-conscious culture.
And remember, listeners, this is just a starting point.
It is.
There's a wealth of information available online to help you understand the Act in more detail and explore your rights.
Yeah,
The Commissioner's website is a great resource,
absolutely.
and there are also many privacy advocacy groups that provide valuable guidance and support.
You're absolutely right. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right.
Seek clarification and advocate for your own privacy.
Yeah.
The resources are out there.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
from the broad principles of the Act to the more nuanced aspects that often go unnoticed.
It's been a comprehensive deep dive.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah.
What would you leave our listeners with to ponder as they continue their own data privacy journey?
I'd say this.
Okay.
In an increasingly data-driven world, our personal information is becoming an incredibly valuable commodity.
Mm.
It's essential that we understand its worth, appreciate the implications of sharing it,
Right.
and take proactive steps to protect our privacy.
Okay.
It's not about being paranoid.
Right.
It's about being informed and empowered.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power. And in the digital age,
It is.
understanding how to protect your data is essential.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Personal Information Protection Act of 2016.
My pleasure.
We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and most importantly, empowering.
It's been a pleasure to explore this crucial topic with you and our listeners.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay in control of your data.
In this podcast, there could be mistakes, so please check the source material. Enjoy exploring and have a great day.